Hello and welcome to this, our fourth webinar from Real Resilience. My name is Ian Betson and I welcome you to the next 90 minutes on a subject that no tape machine can do without, and that is of course tape. And this webinar is titled The What, the Why and How of Audio Tape. What we are planning to do, I said in the next 90 minutes, is go over the new tape types that are available from new old stock, older tapes. We'll also run over some of the specifications that you need to look at when you are selecting a tape for your machine. And then we'll be talking about some of the issues surrounding tapes, such as sticky shed syndrome, and what you can do to preserve your tapes and storing them as well. And we'll also be talking about some of the things that affect tapes, even if you look after them perfectly, such as print through. The what, the why and how of tape. First question, what is audio tape? Well, I suppose you think, well, that might be a pretty simple question. It's rust stuck on a backing. Well, yeah, it is. These are the salient four parts of tape construction. The base and backing, that's the thing that that is the physical material of a tape. We've got the oxide at the front that holds the magnetic information. The oxide isn't just rust. I did find when I was doing some research on this for this webinar, that the tape, the construction and the creation of tape, is a mixture of materials science, chemistry and physics. It really is quite a fascinating subject if you're into it. And one of the main areas is the oxide, and it's not, as I said, not just rust, it's the different chemicals that are added to it and a thing called dispersion of the magnetic particles within the oxide. In the middle, the thing called the binder, which sticks the oxide to the base or backing, and this is the thing that's created angst for us in looking after long-term tapes with issues that tape face, such as sticky shed syndrome. And finally, although not universal, is the back coating on the tape. Back coating is used, well, it can be used to label the tape. A lot of manufacturers do put the tape formulation on the back of the tape, which is really handy. Because you can actually tell what tape it is, because frankly once you get it off the reel or out the box, one bit of tape does tend to start looking like another piece of tape. But also it adds lubrication and eases the wind and makes a nice pack on the reel, because you can get air molecules just like a tyre running on a road surface, which can, aquaplane if it gets water in it. Tape can get air molecules in it which can ruin the pack of the tape, and the back coating can help with that. This tape here, incidentally, is not back coated. As I said, it's not universal, but perhaps if I just give you a close-up of that, and I'll be talking about the other tapes, you'll see. As you can see, it's pretty much, that's the greyish side, the oxide side, but it's quite shiny on that side. It has no back coating, so that's why you can tell is that it has no back coating on it, and what you're seeing is just the backing of the tape. Tape itself comes in a range of sizes. Obviously we've just looked at a 5-inch reel there. You can get mini 3.5 or 3.5 diameter inch reels of 1/4-inch tape, right the way up to the big stuff, as you might have seen. This is 2-inch tape on a 10.5-inch reel, the likes of which a 24-track tape machine would use. Again, if we just look at the close-up, that is the kind of stuff. It's almost getting away from tape as we know it, and it's almost like bunting, but that is Ampex 456. Doesn't suffer the sticky shed, I have to say. It's some of the later stuff, but on a 2-inch reel, and it weighs quite a lot as well. You'll find it as well. This is in other sizes. This is ATR's Grandmaster tape, and it's a 1/2-inch reel on a 1/2-inch diameter. Half-inch width on a 10.5-inch reel. And remember, some of these reels can go up to 14 inches as well, especially if you're running the 2-inch tape there, as we saw. I said all the way down to a 1/4-inch tape on a little 3-inch reel there. The magnetic particles on our tape itself. in-air oxide. They're basically little magnets that are randomly dispersed, randomly mixed in with the formulation and painted onto the binder to hold it onto the base. And as they are, as you see there, that would be an unrecorded, a blank piece of tape with random magnets all just dispersed and in the oxide. The recording process, what actually happens there, as we can see, we've got a tape running, if you were, say, looking at a tape machine from left to right, so a tape direction, we're looking at the head here with the tape running in front of it, so the tape's running from left to right, and it runs past the head. The recording process doesn't actually happen at the center of the head. It actually happens, or being printed on the tracks, just to the side of the head. That is where the magnetic signal, audio signal, is actually, let's call it, printed onto the tape. It also, though it rearranges the magnetic poles in a logical order, in fact you can actually get a device which is glass with some iron filings between the two, and it's like a looking glass, and you can run it over a piece of tape and see the way that the iron filings are organised, and they do look a lot like barcodes because they're closer together or wider apart depending on the different frequencies. But although it's the head there, I put for clarity purposes 2 tracks, the white areas either side of the 2 tracks would still have a random oxide either side, because that is unrecorded, a guard band areas between the 2 tracks or a fringes at the side. But that is where a recording process happens on the tape just after the head gap as the tape runs past the head. Saturated tape. This is, and again, this is using an example of clarity. All the magnets are all arranged in a nice logical order. But saturated means basically the tape can take no more magnetic flux, no more magnetism. All of the poles have been orientated in one particular direction, and the tape can take no more level. Now, there have been stories about the likes of Motown, the Motown sound in the 1960s, and the kind of tape sound, and people would say it's down to tape saturation, that kind of crunchiness. Well, I did some research, and knowing some of my background, as we'll find, tape flux is measured in nanovabers per meter. If you see on a line-up tape, if you ever see one of those, you'll see NWB/M, nanovabers per meter, and a nanovaber is a measure of magnetic flux and magnetic strength on the tape. In my BBC days, in the 1980s and 1990s, the BBC had a standard of 1,000 nanovabers onto a tape will be the loudest signal that will be recorded onto the tape or come off of it. So put that figure in your mind, 1,000 nanovabers. If you look at my number 1 webinar I did on tape lineup, that mentioned about nanovabers and flux levels, and I was using a Tascam 32 machine there, and if you read the specs of the Tascam 32, it could generate 1,500 nanovabers of flux from its record head into the tape. But some of the tapes that you put on that machine would take 2,000 nanovabers of flux before they would saturate. So in other words, going to the BBC, their maximum loudest sound would be 1,000 nanovabers. Even a diminutive little Tascam 32, a nice machine it is, and I said I've got one and like it a lot, nothing against it, could only manage 1,500. And then on top of that, the tapes could take 2,000. So as you can see, it does take an awful lot of level to saturate a tape. Yes, we're talking about the 1960s, where perhaps tape formulations weren't as good as they were when they moved into the 70s, 80s and 90s, and therefore they could saturate earlier. But still, even tapes of that generation, and looking at the specifications of them back to ones of the 1930s and 40s, could easily take 12 to 1,500 nanovabers before they saturated. So it does make you wonder whether that saturated tape sound that you get on those Motown 60s records was more down to distorted electronics rather than the tape saturation. Who knows? But that's a kind of idea of how much level you need to put onto a tape to saturate it. Let's look at tape properties. There are three things here, and we are getting into a little bit of maths here and some technical words, but they are salient, as you'll see, as to when you come to select the type of tape that is ideal for your machine, especially if you're working in the professional environment and you have a multi-track machine, or perhaps you've got a smaller desktop type machine such as a little Akai 4000 or something like that, and you're wondering what tape to use on it. There's three main tape properties you need to look at. Coercivity, how easy a tape is to record on. That's how easy you can turn all those magnetic particles into an ordered line, as we saw. The retentivity, that's how much flux stays on the tape after recording, because some of it will drain away. However, tape, once recorded, will always hold its magnetic signal. It will hold it forever unless it is subject to another external field that will turn those magnets in another way and destroy the signal. It will always hold that signal. The only other way it can lose the signal is if literally the oxide drops off, when we have things such as sticky shed syndrome and the oxide comes off the tape. And then we have the remanence. That's how much flux is imparted into the replay head on replay, and that is a significant parameter, and I urge you to keep that in your mind. Looking at the recording and replay process, how all those three terms figure, we've got a coercivity. As you can see, that's the blue lines coming out there, magnetic waves coming out and going onto the tape. A retentivity, as the tape's gone past and been magnetized. And finally, on the diagram at the bottom, replay, their magnetic poles or a magnetic flux from the recorded tape going back into the replay head, our remanence. Magnetic flux. Again, I don't want to get too technical. I don't want to get too bogged down in school maths. We all don't want to do that. But we do have to take account of this particular equation because it is important to everyday tape usage. Magnetic flux is measured in pi, as we can see here, or the amount of magnetic flux imparted into a tape is known as pi. That circle with a vertical line through it equals BA, where B is the magnetic tape flux density. Talk about that in a minute. The area of the surface, again I'll cover that, and cosine of theta, which is the angle between that area and the magnetic field that our head is imparting into the tape. So magnetic flux density, Tesla's, nothing to do with the car. That's Nikolai Tesla, who gave his name to magnetism, did an awful lot of research and work into magnetism during his career in whenever it was, the 1800s or whatever, and he's had his name lent to the measurement of magnetic flux, magnetic stuff into the tape. The area of the surface, now this is where it starts to get salient to our recording. We get some machines which perhaps could be a multi-track machine where the manufacturers were squeezing 8 tracks into a 1/4 inch wide tape. So on our 1/4 inch wide tape we were getting 8 recording tracks, very, very thin very thin recording tracks. Indeed, if we look at a 24-track, a 2-inch tape, and you'll put 24 tracks on there, if you work out to fit 24 tracks of audio material onto that 2-inch wide tape, it doesn't give you a lot of space, because remember, you've got to allow for a guard band so we don't get crosstalk between adjacent tracks as well. Similarly, you could go to the opposite way, where you get the high standard of recording and reproduction. That's using something like a 1/2 inch tape with as a stereo head. So there's only 2 tracks recorded on this 1/2 inch tape. Extremely wide tracks on the tape, wide guard band so we don't get crosstalk, and a big wide track imparting a lot of remanence, a lot of flux back into our heads. So this is where we can see the area starts to make a difference, because if you don't have that area to record on, the signal's not going to be as high, it's not going to be as loud, and the remanence will be less, or the retentivity will be less, of course, and the remanence, therefore, when it comes to replay. And therefore, you always have tape noise, which is a constant, which is the oxide, as it rubs across the head, is going to be effectively appear louder, a thing called our signal to noise ratio, the difference between the wanted signal and our tape noise. And again, this will also come on to when we cover an issue called print through. And finally, the angle between the area and the magnetic field. And this does, again, have another area that we need to concentrate on. If you imagine looking side on, that is my record head, and a tape is whizzing past the head. the tape needs to be in dead contact with the head. However, if a head is dirty, the tape's going to be pushed away or at an angle. Or if the head is at a different angle, perhaps the wrap or the zenith, and these are other terms that I covered in webinar 1 on lineup, is not correct, and the head is not perpendicular and correctly surfaced against the tape. If it's not correctly surfaced, the angle between the area and the magnetic field, the magnetic area of the tape that's being magnetized and the magnetic field from the head will vary. And that is why if you get start getting dirty heads, your high frequencies start to go down, because effectively, to use a rather crude term, they can't jump across the gap between the magnetic head and into the tape, and therefore magnetize the particles. Or if your head is misaligned, that is where your angle will change, and therefore the amount of magnetic flux imparted into our head goes down. So two terms there, our area and our angle, or our cosine theta, has a bearing on our everyday tape use. Let's talk about tape manufacturers now, because this is one of the areas that we came here for, to talk about new tape. There are currently 4, my research has found, tape manufacturers that are producing new tape, and that is Recording the Masters, ATR, they're from America, Recording the Masters from France, Splice It, they're from America, from the US, and another one I found that I don't know too much about called QMG, and they come out of Australia. If you take a listen to episode 4 of my podcast, I asked Theo Gardan, I said, why did Mulan, who's the parent company of Recording the Masters, get back into recording tape? He said, we never stopped, because if you just look at the back of any card, any credit card, that is recorded tape. We always carried on making it. So we realised that these manufacturers have now taken sort of one step aside, perhaps a jump back or a step aside, to, instead of just sticking the tape on the backs of credit cards and other swipe cards, are now making physical tape again. Recording the Masters. We just do a close-up here. This is RTM 468 tape. If you look at my website, you'll find this reel of tape features quite heavily, because you might recognise the reels. Lovely righteous reels that reels come from. But that's RTM 468, quarter-inch tape on a 10.25-inch tape, so a 10.5-inch reel. RTM SN 911. When you look at them, they are really kind of the same kind of construction. They are the same from the same manufacturer. This is Air Capture 468 tape, HB 10914. Splice It are making 2 types of tape. The only difference is the backing, or the base thickness, which means you can get more on a reel. They also, I think, are making it in a variety of lengths. So although this is a 10.5-inch 2,400 foot reel of tape, they do make it on smaller reels. At the bottom here, we've got Air ATR Magnetics, a beautiful blue reel, in its nice box as well. I can't complain about that. I mean, it's a lovely looking reel and a lovely looking box to keep your tapes in. So they are our new tapes that I have got access to. Incidentally, although I'm laying these tapes like this as a side, on their side at the moment, this is purely for the purposes of the webinar. When I come on to storage, you shouldn't really be laying them on their side, but for the short term, they'll be fine like that. I have the information I found, and the only thing I can find about QMG, and I do apologise for the quality of this, is a document on classichifi.com.au about this QMG tape. We'll come into a bit more about the specifications and what tape might be right for your machine a little bit later, but it's interesting to see some of the information which is down here, and how it relates to the other tapes, such as Air Capture and our ATR tapes that you've just seen there. Tape specifications, again, we're not expecting you to know all of this. This is 2 pages of 4 pages of RTM's SM900 tape specification, and they go into all kinds of information about all the different curves, all the different speeds, all the different recording performance. It really is, if you're into tape, a great read, but frankly it's not going to tell you too much about a particular type of tape. But there is one salient a parameter you do need to look at when you are considering tape, and that is what's known as the overbias if you're lining your machine up for a particular tape. And that, if I just put that there and put it up on the screen there, is in case of RTMs where that red circle is there. It says sensitivity drop for recommended bias settings. And you've got 3 columns there, and at the top of the columns it's 30 IPS, 15 IPS, 7.5 IPS. This will tell you, and again I go into this in webinar 1 about tape lineup, how much overbias you need to give the tape when you are lining it up for record purposes. So with all of that information we've got on here, quite honestly, the only other bits that I would really interest myself in when I'm lining a machine up is the overbias figure. Some manufacturers put a blatantly obvious, like RTM do, overbias figures. Others you have to extrapolate or do some research. I will show you when we get onto new old stock and old tapes that you can get some older specs that do list the overbias, but sometimes you have to look at your retentivity and your remnants figures to work out what the likely overbias will be for that particular tape at that particular tape speed. But again, I said these are the tape specifications. These are available on RTM's website, and indeed ATR also have their specification. And if I just hop back to the Classic Hi-Fi page, they give a basic outline there of their specifications. So moving on. Remember our tape properties: coercivity, retentivity and remnants. These are some figures, and I hope you can read this, and again I will make this available to you as part of the webinar as a follow-up. Tape property comparisons. There's a lot of information there. There's only 2 columns really you need to look at and concentrate on, and that's the oxide thickness, and in the yellow column on the right hand side the remnants. As you can see, I put the major new tape manufacturers down there, from a range from RTM, a range from ATR, Spliceit and QMG. If we just take our SM468 tape from RTM, there are no new tape formulations on the market. All of the formulations, and by the means of a formula, I mean it specifies everything from the width, from the binder, from the backing thickness and the oxide thickness. So there's no new tape formulations have been created. They all use formulations that go back to, with some of them in the case of BASF and Agfas, go back to the 1930s and 1940s when the Germans were first creating magnetic tape recording. But there are no new formulations. They've all specified all of these details as a formulation. ATR, again, it's Ampex Quantigy tape that they've licensed. RTM have licensed the BASF Agfas. If you see 468, SM468 on that line up there, it's the same as Agfa PEM 468, PEM 468. Pop back to the diagram again, or the grid here, and let's concentrate on our SM468. As you can see, base thickness 30 microns. That's the mechanical thickness of the backing. If you are using your machine in a professional capacity, I'd urge you to go for a tape with a thick backing. The thinner the tape, yes, the more you get on the reel, but it will not stand up to if the machine to heavy abuse, if the machine snatches or you're fast forwarding and rewinding backwards and forwards. I have seen the thinner tape be stretched by machines before. I've even seen a big 2-inch 24 track a sort of whiplash kick and strip the binder off the tape. And I have the binder as evidence. Pity I didn't bring it with me now, but I've actually got the not the binder, I should say, the oxide stripped off the backing as it's whipped so hard. So the tape itself survived, the backing survived, but the binder got stripped off. But I would suggest if you're shuttling tape backwards and forwards using it in a professional environment, go for a tape with a thicker backing. If you're using your tape in a domestic environment, perhaps you're putting a few reels on, you just want to record and basically you're on a budget for a long record time, well then you could use something like an LPR, long play record, I assume that stands for LPR. If you look at those top two columns from RTM, SM468 and LPR35, they actually are the same formulation, but they're just painted on. If we look at our oxide thickness in microns, there's 3 microns thinner oxide on the LPR35, the base thickness is thinner, and the overall total thickness is 47 and 35. As a small aside, if you're seeing tapes that have got 35/90 on them, and a lot of old tapes have that. I saw some TDKs the other day that had 35/90. The 35 stands for the oxide, the whole combined thickness of the binder, the oxide, and the backing. So therefore, it is quite a thick tape. It will be a long play tape. Let's move on to the other bits and bobs I've mentioned. There are coercivity, retentivity, I should say, get that word out, and our remnants. Don't worry too much about the coercivity. It's measured in a thing called Oersteds, and it's just a figure here, 370 Oersteds, how much grunt we need to impart a magnetic signal into the tape, to realign all those little magnets into our nice thin tracks. Retentivity is measured in Gauss in this case. You might find a thing called MTs, milliteslas, and they're basically a tenth of the Gauss, so you'll find 140 in that case instead of 1400 Gauss, 140 milliteslas. But the real thing to look at is their remnants in a yellow column there, 1990 nanovebers per meter. How much flux? We've covered all that in our pi equals BA cosine theta equation, and it's measured in nanovebers, our magnetic flux. 1990 and 1800 for our LPR35. So in other words, our LPR35 will not give us much level, will not give us much recorded signal on replay as our RTM468, in spite of the fact that it's the same tape formulation, the same oxide dispersion in the tape formulation. And one of the reasons for that is if we look at our oxide thickness of 14 and 11, those 3 microns do make a difference as to how much level you can put into a tape. And so that is one of the salient areas that to look for in oxide thickness as to how much, when people talk about hot tapes, one of the reasons is they've got a thicker oxide thickness in their construction. If you're looking to go to recording tapes for professional use, perhaps you wanted to do direct-to-tape recordings and you're in that market, I would urge you to look at RTM's SM900. It is their premier tape. Let's whiz along right to the yellow column there, 2,320 nanovebers per meter remnants. Incidentally, that's the saturated remnants. So if, in other words, if we completely saturated the tape, that's how much nanovebers per meter, how much flux would come off that tape. But it's still an indication of when people talk about a hot tape as to how much level you can push onto the tape. And one of the reasons you can do that, jumping back to our oxide thickness, 18 microns, and it's extremely thick oxide thickness for the tape, and therefore you can push a lot of level onto it. LPR90 is a formulation that RTM have created themselves. Agfa never created a long play 900, and all they've done there is taken the same formulation but cut the micron thickness, or the oxide thickness, down by 9 microns. As a result, as you can see, the remnants of 1800 has dropped quite significantly, but it's their long play version of that. And then we've got SM911 down the bottom here. Incidentally, you might see that you've got the same remnants figure, but you've got only 16 microns, 2 microns less than their SM900. You think, well, why don't you just stick to SM911? It might be a cheaper tape. I believe it is. Why am I going to that? Well, these aren't just the be-all and end-all. It's the way of the figures that you should go on to select a tape, but they are a salient point. But one of the things that SM900 has got, due to the dispersion, the way that the oxide is mixed into the layer that they paint onto the tape, the dispersion is different to SM900, and therefore it means the signal-to-noise ratio, the distance between the wanted signal and the tape noise, is that much higher, or it is increasing over 911 tape. If we look at our ATR tapes now, their MDS36 is basically a long play version of their master tape. Jumping across there, they've got 12 microns across both. They make the saving on the 36 by cutting the total micron, the backing down. But if you look there, I couldn't find a figure on the right hand side on their yellow column for remnants, and I believe it's around 1900. This is what I'm saying, is when you start to have to work on overbias figures, sometimes you have to work out, taking this information, how much you're going to overbias a tape for, based on tapes that have got similar construction, oxide thickness, backing thickness, and all those kind of things. We look at Air Capture 914, 930 is their long play version. They say in their literature it is similar to Ampex 456. Ampex 456 is same as ATR's master tape. It's near that. They do publish a remnants figure of 1950, but their oxide thickness is down to 9 microns, so you're not going to be able to push a lot of level onto that tape. So I'd certainly watch out for that. QMG, if we went back to that diagram, or the specification, I should say, image on one of the slides, and that's the only information I could find out about QMG. I noticed, if you look at the figures, they're exactly the same as Splicit's Capture 930, so 19.9, 31, 360, 1300 and 1950. This isn't to say, you might say, well, QMG are just taking Capture 930 tape and sticking their own label on it and selling it. I found nothing to the contrary. All the paperwork I've read about it, they are manufacturing the tape. But as I said, no one is making new tape formulations anymore. They've licensed it. So give QMG their due. Like Spliceit, they'd probably just gone to Quantigy or whoever, who's holding the rights to the tape formulations now, just as ATR did, and licensed the 456 tape formulation and are marketing it as QMG. So what does this all mean for, all these figures mean for your particular tape machine? Well, as I said, if you've got a very thick oxide thickness, you're going to need quite a machine to drive it. And quite honestly, no disrespect, I've got an Akai GX4000. I'm using that as an example as a nice little domestic machine. But even if you could step up to something like a Revox A77, or even the B77, those machines, quite honestly, are not going to create the grunt to drive the tape level on SM900 tape to get the benefit of it. Yes, they'll record on it perfectly, but if you're trying to push all that level onto the tape to get a high signal to noise ratio, to get high peaks, to get good remnants that's coming off the tape, the poor little machine's not going to do it. It just wasn't designed to run on that tape. It was designed to run on something similar to 468, or possibly even our Capture 914. They do make it in 7 and 5 inch reels, I believe, certainly 7 inch reels, so your smaller machines will take it. So there's pointless spending the extra money on an SM900 and SM911 tape, because your machine just will not get the benefit of it. The flip side is, if you're in the recording industry and you're using it professionally, I think SM468 is still a good tape. I said it's the BBC selected it as their standard tape from Agfa, and in my days we were using 2-inch 468 to record on. This is late 1980s, early 1990s. Perfectly good results. But again, if you wanted to step up and just feel a bit more confidence that you're pushing as much level onto the tape and you've got a lot of headroom and what have you, you could jump up to your SM900 tape and use that. We've spoken about new tapes and the tape manufacturers. Let's talk about NOS, new, old stock, or indeed old tape. Let's say new. As I said, buy for your machine. What tape's best suited for your machine? I just can't go on over that. New, old stock. what's its storage history? If I just go to a collection of tapes here, this is MTEK tape. It's SM468. I know it says SM468 because you might be able to read that. There we are, SM468 tape on the box. Notice the marks on the box, but that's not carried over to the tape itself. This was a reel of tape, actually a box of 10 reels I bought that have been in store, I suspect, since about the late 90s, I suspect. SM468 tape on a lovely looking reel there, and in a nice box, new old stock. MTEK are no longer making magnetic recording tape. They do make magnetic products, and if you Google them, you will find that they do exist, but they don't make any tapes at all. I've inquired and they said no, we've stopped. But this is classic new old stock tape, never been used, never been recorded on, still in its box with its wrapper. I haven't used this yet. I have used another reel of the box of 10 I bought, and it is extremely good condition. This particular brand of tape in the 80s and 90s didn't suffer from, to our knowledge, from any of the problems that some of the earlier tapes in the 70s suffered from. There's another tape here, which is Zonal 675. Zonal 675 is, again, a good old SM468, Agfa PEM 468 tape. Zonal, and indeed MTEK, and along with Agfa, was selected by the BBC to be their Type 200 tape in about 1982-83, if I recall, when they swapped over to a higher recording tape. If you go onto my website, onto the free downloads, there's a nice little document about the BBC's history of tape, and although I said I'm ex-BBC and extremely proud of being trained by them, they did know what they were talking about when it came to tape. I mean, if you think as an indication, they were using 100,000 reels of 10.5-inch tape a year, and that excluded all the stuff on 7-inch, all the multi-track tape, and all the other bits and bobs that they used, all the other 5-inch reels for their small Uher portable recorders and Nagra recorders they used. So they selected 3 manufacturers to produce SM468 tape and called it Type 200. One of those manufacturers was Zrekel Zonal, and they manufactured it under their Zonal 675 brand. Again, new old stock. It is great tape, doesn't suffer from sticky shed, really robust, good thick backing, and if you can get hold of some of that distinctive box there, I recommend that. You must know, though, what, as I said here, what the storage history is. Yes, there is some what appears to be like damp or moldness attacking on here on the box, a slight discoloration. But as I said, it hasn't been covered, hasn't carried over, as you can see there, on the box edge, or indeed into the tape itself. So that's a good indication that this tape is good, and there's no mold or anything growing onto the tape. But what is its history before you jump in and buy old stock? New old stock is getting increasingly hard to find, but who knows, you might find. I said I was lucky and came across several boxes of it, and I said I bought a box of 10 off the supplier, and it's been very, very good. Old tape, what's its generic and personal history? When I was researching these kind of details for this webinar, there's a great resource called Reel to Reel Warehouse, and I urge you to look at that. I think they're an American-based operation, but they basically refurbish tape. They take old tape and they refurbish it. They check it for its construction and its recording, its remnants, its how much magnetic flux in its particular types. And then they release various batches. Obviously, it's what they get hold of. One of them they mentioned here, and there's a great site, is this on their great site, TDK Aduna tape. Again, it's a tape that I read in the specifications is not the best stuff in the world. It does suffer from some various things that afflict it. There's another one here I've got, Sony ULH tape. I have a lot of these tapes because people ask me sometimes to line machines up for the particular tapes they're using. They record a lot of material perhaps on their Sony ULH tape. I did some research on the Reel to Reel Warehouse site, and it says here, and I've made a note of it, it's a good performance level, high output, and it's got quite a high bias. You should over bias it by, but it says playback only, do not record, sticky shed, must be baked before use. So that's the Sony ULH tapes. If you've got some of that, perhaps it's starting to not be in the best of health. This stuff always appears up on the forums. The good old Shamrock and the concert tapes. These were made by or sold by Radio Shack, or if you're in the UK, Tandy. It was the same brand. They bought a tape manufacturing plant in the States in the 1970s or 80s, I believe, and started making tape themselves. Shamrock, there is a story going around. It is rejected Ampex tape. Yes, it is, but again, go on to Reel Warehouse, they tell you yes, it is, but some of it they didn't always reject it. They went to other sources to produce the to get Shamrock tape, because I don't know, maybe Ampex weren't rejecting as much as they were. This is a good old tape. It's not, to my knowledge, back coated. It's rather thin stuff. It's not the best in the world, and frankly, I wouldn't would be my first choice to record on. Again, you looking at the details of the tape, they do go into it on this website about all the different history of it, and and indeed some of it was acetate tape, acetate backing. The backing itself, or the base I should say, is invariably polyester. 90% of tapes, and let's call them modern tapes, anything from the 1970s onwards, were polyester. But ones prior to that could have been acetate, and they have a history of going very brittle, and literally the tape would just snap in half, almost like tearing some tissue. Really, the machine would just split it. Hasn't lasted that well. Same as the good old concert tapes. I said these are 1800 feet on a 7-inch reel. I said I've got a reel of that. It looks very similar to our, let's have a look at their box here. Looks very similar to our Shamrock type tape. So don't get the two confused. Again, they were probably using the same old reels in the factory to put them on there. And again, Realistic Tandy, that's another particular one there. That's their professional quality realistic recording tape with Mylar coating on it. They're saying that the use of it actually is good for daily use at all speeds. So actual fact, this tape, this realistic recording tape, which doesn't look kind of like the best kid on the block, there, according to Reel Warehouse, it lasts very well. So sometimes don't believe all of the stories. You'll find other tapes such as this particular Philips reel of tape, again not back coated. I would use this to demonstrate a thing later on called sticky shed syndrome and what you should look out for. But again, you can tell very oxidey, very thin, domestic grade machines. Nothing against that if you're using tape in your home listening. But again, I would caution about using this for any professional use. Issues: soft binder, sticky shed syndrome, loss of lubricant, and indeed white powder syndrome. Soft binder and sticky shed syndrome are related, and they are something that can afflict all tapes, although there are some tapes are more susceptible than others. And everybody talks about the good old Ampex 456 in the 1970s, allegedly that they had a duff batch of binder, or the binder they particularly used was susceptible to sticky shed syndrome. So what is that? Well, what happens over time, a tape, no matter how well it's stored, will absorb moisture. We absorb moisture just as you have a piece of paper. If you leave it, it will start to absorb moisture. So the tape itself, okay, the binder survived, but the backing survived, but the binder absorbed the moisture, and as a result of when a tape went through on a pass on a tape machine through all the tape guides, it literally scraped the oxide off the tape and of course ruined the recording. As I said, a tape, if it is not exposed to any exterior forces, whether that's magnetism or physical forces such as having the oxide scraped off, will hold that signal indefinitely. Obviously, you're scraping it off with all the posts and the heads, you're destroying the recording. It can also happen where the tape itself, not just as the heads scrape it off, but it can also stick together. So as the tape is pulled off the reel, it will it will pull the binder off, or pull the oxide. The backing of the other reel will pull the binder off the reel as it's coming, or off the tape as it's coming off the reel. A good test to do to see if a tape survives sticky shed syndrome is to see if it drops off the reel okay. I've got a reel of tape here. Actually, I'll try it with his leader tape just to demonstrate what I mean. Is if you find your tape can literally just, and this leader tape obviously has no oxide and no binder on it and will just drop off, but if your normal recording tape would just literally, you can do that to it and it falls off, that's a good indication that it's not suffering from sticky shed. However, it's always best to be wise to check it fully, physically examine it, and you might need to subject it to baking, what we call baking, and I'll come on to that, to order to preserve it, to allow you to replay it. White powder syndrome is actually the opposite to sticky shed syndrome, and I have seen a lot of people on posts say my tape is covered in mould, and I'm wondering whether it is actually mould. You remember I showed you that M-Tech box of the new old stock tape. There might have been some mould growing on it, but the tape was okay. But you get some people who will say, oh, I've got what looks like mould growing on my tape. It's a good example here. I don't know whether you can see it. Let's put it onto the box there. You'll see the thing there. But if you can see it there, that looks like white, people would say, is mould. I suspect that isn't. I suspect that is a thing called white powder syndrome. And I said it's the opposite to sticky shed syndrome, that where in sticky shed the water is being absorbed by the binder, in white powder the water is evaporating from the binder due to the different binder mix and the environmental conditions it's been stored in, and as a result the binder's just turning to white dust, and that's the same. It will have the same thing, that a tape pass can scrape the oxide off the off the tape as it passes through. Indeed, I had a reel of Scotch 202 tape that I was looking at, which is quite a good tape. Again, if you go to Reel Warehouse and see their specs, you'll see what they think about Scotch 202. It's not a bad tape, but it had been wound, I suspect, for about 20 years and had never been wound off the tape. And although it fell off the reel quite easily, the inside reel of tape, where it was stuck to where it was round on the hub, had actually welded itself to the hub. And although it spooled off perfectly, as it got to the last bit, it kicked and literally just snapped the last piece of tape off the reel as the reel ran out, and you could see all of the oxide was stuck around the inside of the hub and the tape itself, which is completely clear. So that had obviously been pressed so much on, because it had been held there on the pancake for 20 years or so. I knew it was about 20 years, as you see by the documentation for the paper on the paperwork of it, that it had just ruined the end bit. So that's your white powder syndrome. The one in the middle, loss of lubricant. Again, if you go to Reel Warehouse, they've got some great articles on this, and they don't tend to go into, well, they haven't gone into a great deal of depth, because they say it's not entirely understood what loss of lubricant is, because by definition, tapes don't have lubrication on them. It's not like oil or graphite. You can get some tapes that do have a lubricated tape. Indeed, ATR make one. If you're into your music recording and have heard a thing called a 1970s device called a Space Echo, it uses graphite lubricated tape, just as because it's not on reels. It actually sits in a kind of box with where the tape is fed and off through the box through a replay head and a record head, pinch roller, and then back into the storage box again to stop that tape snagging. It is actually lubricated, and they make a lubricated tape for it again. But by definition, most tapes didn't have lubrication on them. Yes, the backing acted as a way of smoothing the path, so to speak, but it wasn't actually lubricant. But there is this term called loss of lubricant, but one of the things that you will hear people say it's a loss of lubricant is if a tape starts to squeal as it goes through the head, the tape path through the transport on the pins, and the tape starts to screech. It's being dragged against the pins. Some people say that's sticky shed syndrome. It's all being scraped off the tape and packed up onto the pins, but other people have got this idea that it's loss of lubricant. But I think I will go along with what Reel to Reel Warehouse say, and it's not entirely understood what loss of lubricant is, but it is still a thing that can affect tape. So how do we get over some of these issues so our tapes don't fall apart in front of our eyes? Perhaps we're buying some new old stock, or perhaps you've got some old pre-recorded tapes that we want to preserve. I should say, actually, here's a couple of pictures of what the damage of this tape can look like. That is a tape that's had its oxide completely stripped off. As you can see, it's just got the clear polyester backing, and we can see daylight through it. This is actually two cases of real-world cases that I had of a customer whose machine ground to a halt after one pass of playing on it, and it was Ampex 456 that was being played on it, unfortunately. And this is what sticky shed syndrome looks like on Ampex 456, on, in this case, an Akai, and on a Revox as well. That is the recorded signal, obviously, with all of the oxide and the binder just being stripped off the tape and being smeared across the heads. So that's what you should be looking out for. And indeed, you might find some machines that are completely caked in this stuff because people have been playing tapes that suffer from sticky shed, and in the end there's just no replay response from the machine or record response because the heads are completely gummed up, and as we go on air, pi BA cosine theta equation, the tape is spaced away from their magnetic field and is not recording. So baking. Let's talk about baking. Baking is not a perfect permanent fix, and not all tapes can be baked. And the other thing is, it doesn't involve baking or putting anywhere near your oven. Do not do that. This is what I've got here. This is a dehumidifier. It's one I bought off Amazon buy everything off Amazon nowadays, don't we? For about under $30, and it basically consists of where you'd normally put your food in here, various trays, and load it up, and then switch it on and dehydrate your food. Quite amazingly, it could have been built for 10.5-inch reels, because they fit perfectly in the hub there. I don't know whether they use the tape 10.5-inch reels as a pattern for making these platters, or you can just stick your on a separate reel, not on top of each other. I hasten to add, you can just put, if you're making a smaller tape, just put them around here and load the machine up and set it to dehydrate. The dehydration settings are down here. I think, if I remember, it's 35 degrees centigrade, so that's I think that's something like 60, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I do suggest, if you're not entirely sure on centigrade Fahrenheit conversions, just get a routine on your computer just to check. But I work in centigrade, and it's 35 degrees. I set it for 35 degrees for 4 hours, just switch the machine on, and it hums away and dehydrates, and then after 4 hours I switch it off, or it switches itself off, and then I just leave it for another 4 hours to naturally cool down, and it works for me. That's the way that I do my baking. I've done some work for the British Library Sound Archive, and they have recordings going back to Queen Victoria and Florence Nightingale, albeit not on magnetic tape. I think they were on wax cylinder, but they have preserved a lot of tapes, thousands of tapes. And they have racks of these good old dehydrators humming away, dehydrating the tapes. As I said, it is not a permanent fix. Yes, you can dehydrate, and then you can play your tape. There's some talk about whether it'll last, say, sort of 6 months or so before you need to bake again. But even then, I would not continue to bake it. Frankly, if you've got a tape that needs baking, I would use it not as a general listening tape, but really to transfer it onto some other media rather than continue to use it. One thing I do with all my tapes, incidentally, or even the brand new stuff, put it in a bag if I can, and also put one of these silica gel packets in it. This is classic old tape that is just, if you see that, is just horrible looking stuff. Let's hold it up to the other camera. As you can see, it's in appalling condition. There's probably a white powder there. But the other problem is it's stored in this cardboard box, and that is going to absorb moisture, which is not going to do the tape a whole heap of favours. So yes, I store mine in plastic bags with one of those silica gel packets, and it does very well. The other thing you might have seen on the desk, this is a little tip actually I learned only last week, and it works perfectly. You get these little chip-looking polystyrene packing things, and you can use them as tape tie-downs just by literally pushing them into the tape, and it stops your tape running away. And as the poster said, it's a lot better than some plastic dedicated thing that will snap or you can use. And you'll always lose these. They drop out. And, well, next time you get another Amazon delivery or whatever, you'll get some of these, no doubt, and you can just use them as tie downs, and they work very, very well on full reels of tape. Obviously, if you've got a spoke reel that's half full, they are less great, but on a full reel of tape, I thoroughly recommend that as a quick tip. Not all tapes can be baked. There's talk that acetate tapes don't like being baked that much, and there is some other tapes that I've heard, oh no, you shouldn't bake them at all. I can't really go into that detail too much in this webinar. We'll be here longer and longer and longer, but I suggest you check on the net. I said Reels to Reel Warehouse is a great repository of information on tape preservation, and there's also some other archive preservation organisations have websites dedicated to tape preservation and mention all this information. But it's a good way, as I said, to get into your baking. If you want to do it, you can get yourself a dehydrator. I do know of a chap, he's not in the business anymore, and I used to look after his multi-track machines. I once went down there to service his big Studer 24 track, and I said, oh, what's the tape on there for? He said, oh, it's got a problem on it, can you look at it? I said, well, what's the tape on there? That's a Bob Dylan master tape, he said. So I thought, better make sure that the record functions on this machine do not work when I'm going anywhere near it. But he would bake his tapes literally. He said, oh, you don't need any of that stuff. He constructed a box that was like the size of a microwave oven, and in there was a 100-watt incandescent light bulb, filament light bulb, and he just put that in, switched the light on, put the stuff in the box, shut the door on it, built this sort of insulated stuff with a bit of rock wool around the outside, and just left it for 24 hours, switched the light off, left it for 24 hours, came back, took the tapes out. He maintained that went perfectly well in terms of baking, and I guess the Bob Dylan master tapes he was transferring at the time survived that okay. So that's baking for you. Other aspects that we can touch on. I've said a couple of tips I've done, or tests I was doing with Sticky Shed, and I was just demonstrating some leader tape. This is just bog standard leader tape. As I put there is no pan format standard. Again, I've seen posts saying, oh, what leader tape colours should I use? And there are people quite legitimately who have worked in broadcasting organisations across Europe or across the world and America and said, we used to use this, we used to use that. For instance, why I've got some of this stuff, this was being thrown out from the BBC. They used to use this at the end of their tapes to denote the red was the end and the red white, I believe. It was a stereo tape, and you could see it, or it might have been used at the start for all I know. I've just got some reel there. I just use yellow and red because that's what I've got. Yellow at the start, red at the back. It's always useful to have two different coloured leader tapes because therefore you know which end is which, obviously. But to my knowledge, there's no standard. Organisations might have standards, but there's no pan standard. So frankly, just use any leader tape that you feel comfortable with. Do use quality leader tape, and they are making it again. Go on the RTM website, go on the ATR websites. They are making leader tape for all tape widths, 1/4 inch through to 2 inch tape. And indeed the splicing tape. If you want to learn how to tape splice, even if it's just sticking leader tape onto the start of your tapes, and I do recommend you do it, apart from the fact you get the full length of the recording tape, 2,400, 1,800, 3,600 feet of tape, it does mean that the beginning of the tape isn't getting sacrificed and hammered. You're using the leader tape to do it. But if you want to learn how to splice, there's a free document, PDF download on my website, realresilience.co.uk, where you can, I've given you a step-by-step guide in photos of how I do tape splicing to join tape together, or indeed tape editing. It outlines that as well. Storage best practice. Well, as I said earlier, I was stacking all these tapes up on one on top of the other, which is not the best idea. They do get, therefore, edge crushing. The best idea is pretty much store them upright. You want them in a and unfortunately, this is the problem with so many old tapes and archive tapes. They've not been stored in the best conditions. Not put in your shed, not put in the loft. Try and keep them where you live, and not so it's reasonably warm and not too humid, not too hot, not too cold. Really, how we like to live environmentally. The tapes will probably be okay as well. I wouldn't store them in bright sunlight. It's not like a film that would get damaged, but you know, it's still heat and heat variations, and that's will start to take its toll. It's the same with, and I have got very few of them actually. I don't buy any old tape. I take it off people's hands because otherwise it's going to skip it. Even, you know, who knows? You might be able to recover the reels, but I don't buy old tapes. But I've got very few as a result pre-recorded tapes. So I've got a couple of these Beach Boys tapes. They're 3 3/4 mono, so they're not going to be the brilliantly high quality. I did bake them as a matter of course. I thought, what have I got to lose before I play them? I haven't yet played them. They only came to me last week, but we'll see. But again, do store your pre-recorded tapes in exactly the same as if you've any tapes that you recorded yourself. Print through and tails out. This is I'm actually before we go on to print through and tails out, demagging. That's one thing that I should have covered. This is a demagnetizer. I'm not going to demonstrate demagnetizing because all the magnetic field will probably screw up all the video and also the proximity of it. But this is a little Akai demagger I've got. Basically, it's a pin here that pushes up. You push that down to switch it off. Release it, the light comes on and the magnetism starts. You put the tape on the reel and you slowly rotate the tape around, and again it'll take 10.5-inch reels with the appropriate hub. You just slowly turn it around and maybe 2 or 3 passes, and it will basically obliterate anything that's on the recorded tape. Obviously, don't do it next to your Beach Boys tapes or any of your pre-recorders or presser stuff. And the other thing is, if you've got a pacemaker or any other electrical gizmos in your body, I would consider whether you want to use a demagger. Certainly there are big demaggers. There's the ones I know of called Weircliffs, and they are huge, great things, almost the size of a tape machine on its side, and you put a whole 10.5-inch or even 14-inch, 2-inch reel into it and rotate it slowly around, and it would blast anything off the tape. We were always told they had big stickers around them if you've got a pacemaker, or indeed if you've got a digital watch. When they were coming in the sort of 80s or whatever, and an Apple Watch like this one, I wouldn't put it anywhere near a demagger. Take it off, put it a long way away, because the magnetic fields might interfere with it. So yeah, that's demagging. Let's talk about print through and tails out. So what is print through? Let's just put this diagram up on the screen so you can see it. It's a little bit of a lot to digest, but I'll talk my way through it. We've got our tape head at the top, and we've got our tape direction going from left to right, and we've got 3 sections of tape, C, B and A. Obviously A is being recorded first as it meets the head, B and C. We've also got our oxide at the top and our base and binder. If we then pop down to the bottom diagram, this is an illustration of it on the hub, tapes that have been wound on the hub. And you can see this is if it was wound on the take-up side of the tape. So this tape has run through, A has gone onto the hub, or the hub nearest the hub itself, then we've got B, and then we've got C. Print through happens because of the magnetic signal that's on adjacent layers of tape here, being imparted into the tape either side of it. However, I spoke way back about remnants and how much level you can put onto the tape. If you can't put a lot of signal onto the tape, you don't get a loud signal. and the louder the louder the signal is, or the volume of the remnants you put on is dictated by the thickness of the oxide layer. Remember we spoke about our 18 microns or a 9 microns of tape oxide thickness on our tape, LPR 35s or our capture tape, and you can't therefore get a louder signal off the tape because literally the oxide isn't that thick. Well, print through is basically a small volume of signal that's being imparted into the tape from the adjacent layer, and as a result it will sit in the top layer of the oxide. It will not penetrate down, because penetrating down it means a layer is getting thicker and we are getting more level off. It's a very small echoey signal that sits at the top layer of the tape. Now if we look at our diagram here, we've got our oxide, and therefore the print through is likely to be at the top layer of the tape. The backing, the black line here, acts as a magnetic shield to the print through. So therefore, as I said here, section C will receive the most print through as its top surface is nearest the inside of the top of the reel. As you can see here, section C, that's its backing there, and that's its oxide, and it's receiving the oxide through the from section B. Section A, where the print through would land on the top of the oxide, it's got the bit from section B which will print through to section A has got to go through the backing and has got to go through all of the lower level of the oxide. So therefore the print through is likely to be less, but as it says here, section C will receive the most print through, and it will appear as a post echo on playback. Now, why is that? Well, if we look at our next diagram here, this is pre-echo and post-echo. If this tape was stored tails in, i.e. conventionally on the, you'll put it onto the supply side of your machine and roll it through, any print through appears as a pre-echo. And that means you've got your louder signal, and if you're listening to it, you'll just hear a ghost of the audio just before the louder signal starts. And that can be a little bit weird. It's known as pre-echo. Tapes that are stored tail out, that print through will happen as a post echo, and although it doesn't stop print through, there is nothing you can do to stop print through whichever way you run the tape. Even the only way really to stop print through is to have the tape completely laid out flat for 2,400 feet or whatever the tape length it is. That's the only way you can do it. So post echo, it will appear at the end of the loud signal. So as you can see here, we've got a green wanted signal and then a faint red signal, a faint print through right at the end. But that audibly is quite pleasing because it's just as an echo, and it's what we would hear. You'll also notice, although this weird pre-echo and post-echo at the back here, that you've still got print through all the way through, but it's masked by the louder green signal. Now, when I spoke about SM900, SM911 tapes and loud signal to noise ratios, when manufacturers talk about low noise tapes, you're more likely to suffer from print through from a low noise tape. And that's not because the action of a low noise tape is more susceptible to print through, it's because the lower noise is allowing you to hear the print through. If it was a higher noise, sort of a standard tape that had high tape noise, it would mask the print through. So in actual fact, if you've got a high level recording tape, such as our SM900 and SM911, it will be more susceptible to the effects of print through. All tapes will, as I said, will have print through, but you will actually hear it, more likely to hear it, because it's lower noise and there's more level. That magnetism that you've imparted in the tape, that the machine's managed to push onto the tape in the form of remnants, or retentivity, and then playback of remnants, has got to go somewhere, and it goes to our bands. We just drop back to our diagram here. It's going to work its way through the bands and go onto the top layer of the tape as print through, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that is print through it sort of explained, and I hope that gets over that if you store your tape in a tail out fashion, i.e. you have to load the tape on the right hand side, the take up reel first, and indeed if you put your coloured leader tape on, you'll know that which end is which. You then have to rewind it before playing for the first time onto the take up spool, and then you can play it. Hopefully you'll minimize the effects of print through because it will be post echo rather than pre-echo. So that's about it for our Q&A, for our overview on tape. Let's jump onto that one first. And now we're on to a Q&A session. I've got a couple of questions that have come in. Firstly, people say, well, what will be best for my domestic machine, maybe a Pioneer or maybe an Akai? I would go, my go-to tape, okay, I'm in Europe and there is, we do have delivery and shipping costs to take into account, but my go-to tape is always SM468. I find it's a great all-round tape. It can be used in professional environments, and it can be used in consumer and domestic environments as well. It's a nice tape, nice solid, nice robust tape, and it doesn't kind of let you down. Yes, it's not as high level as a good old 900, 911 tape, but sometimes we have to make compromises. But one thing about 468 tape, it is a low print through tape. Again, a combination of the level you're putting onto it and indeed the noise floor. If you're in the States and you really feel you don't want to pay for RTM shipping costs, perhaps you could look at the ATR master tape, and they do the long play version, the MDS 36, which will be fine. They do a lot of these tapes on 5-inch, 7-inch and 10.5-inch reels, depending on what thickness tapes you want. Obviously, if you're getting into the bigger or wider stuff, such as 1-inch, half-inch, 1-inch and 2-inch tape, I think it only comes on 10.5-inch reels. But if you've got a small domestic machine, take 7-inch, 5-inch reels. Indeed, if you're lucky enough to own one that take 10.5-inch, 1/4-inch reels, you can buy those tapes in that sizes. I don't know what Splice It or the QMG tape sizes come in from the website, and when I bought it, it was 10.5-inch reels, but they might be cutting it up into 5-inch and 7-inch reels now. So I've got another question coming from Joel here. He said, I'm not sure I completely understand which reel to wind on to store tails out, the take-up reel or the backup of the original reel. Well, let's take Eric's example here, Joel. We've got, this is a manky old tape, which we'll have to bake. Good old Ampex tapes are suffering from sticky shed. So let's say it's perfectly okay to play. I load it on the machine on my hub, and if it had been stored tails in, i.e. the start of the tape, I put it on the left-hand side supply reel, I lace it through, I press play, and away I go. And that's it. I hear the audio. If it had been stored tails out, and I think from the fact that this leader tape is red and white leader, again there's no standard, but I just got an idea this might be the tail of the tape. I would then need to load that on the right hand side, reverse lace the machine up back to the take-up reel, rewind it all the way back, and then I can press play and listen to it. Now you might be thinking that's fine if it's a 2-track tape, that's all it is, just 2 tracks, and I don't turn it over, whereas a 4-track tape where you might have 2 tracks in one direction and then you turn it over, physically turn the tape over. You're not going to get over the effects of print through on both sides, because at any one time with a tape that's got an A and a B side on it, if you store it tails out to protect, say, the A side, the B side is effectively tails in, so we'll be suffering from this pre-echo issue. I'm afraid with 4-track tapes that you turn over, there's nothing you can do. One side will always suffer from a pre-echo on print through. The other side will be a post-echo. But if it's a standard recording tape, 2-track tape or 24-track tape, especially if you are recording tapes for professional use, 16 or 8/16 24-track tapes, store them tails out to minimize the effects of print through. So I hope that's okay. Jamie's asking, you say you don't buy used tape. Can a well-stored second-hand recording tape compare to a new tape it is being demagged or even not demagged? I would, if I was buying, the only reason I say I don't buy used tape is only because I buy a selection of tapes. As you saw, I had all of that capture tape, and I bought it only as an examples to see what it can do. I've got the SM900 and the 911s only because people ask me, remember I'm servicing machines here, and they ask me, can you line it up for SM900, or can you line it up for a 468 or ATR? So I've got samples of those tapes that I can use. So I only don't buy used tapes because I've got new tapes that I use on customers' machines. If you were buying used tape, I would firstly look, just popping out a camera here while I pick it up. A good old MTech tape here. This is new old stock, but it's effectively the old bit. It's a used tape. The only thing that's really different to an old tape is it's never been recorded on. It's still probably the same age. It's still 30 years old, this tape, as manufactured. I will be looking for the physical sides of it, the signs of it. Yes, we've got this discoloration on the box here, but internally the tape looks very, very good. So I'm happy with that. Certainly much better than this poor old thing that's got labels stuck all over it, and what looks like it's been poorly wound, so it might have crushing. I would be looking for those physical things. The best way to get rid of the information on your to completely demag it is use a demagger, because although your machine will wipe, and if it's set up properly, will erase of those two tracks it created, wipe that tape of those two tracks, those kind of like two furrows it's ploughed through the whole width of the tape, and erase those perfectly. There will be, depending on the way that the machine was set up that originally recorded that tape, there could be other material that your machine doesn't erase that's in the guard zone areas. And depending how the tape can go through, if it does wave up and down, it's still, even if your tape passes perfect, tape will still rock up and down as it goes past the heads. It could be picking up that fringe material. And of course your machine, where the raise heads are only designed to take those two furrows out as erasing it, will not be able to get rid of that fringe material that your record head, or your replay head I should say, might be picking up. So the only true way to fully wipe your tape is to stick it through a demagger and blast everything off and make it to a completely wiped tape. How does it compare to new tapes and old tapes? Quite frankly, if the tape can mechanically stand up to it, a tape can take as many passes as it wants. Yes, as you do play it, it will suffer from some oxide wear. Oxide will be worn off. That's why we have to clean tape heads, because there is some oxide worn off. But if your tape's not suffering from sticky shed, you saw those pictures where the heads are completely gummed up, being gummed up by the sticky shed. If it's not suffering from that, frankly, a tape, whether it's new or old, will take many passes. I won't say infinite. It will eventually start to wear out. If you've seen the film Bohemian Rhapsody, I think when that was being launched, they had like Brian May and Roger Taylor of the band Queen saying that when they recorded Bohemian Rhapsody, they did so many overdubs, they did so many retakes of the 2-inch tape that you could see daylight through it. Well, I actually have to take issue with that, because if you could see daylight through that tape, you haven't got any oxide on that tape, and Bohemian Rhapsody would have just disappeared, and then the only way to recreate it is they'd have to re-record it on fresh tape. But of course they did a lot of passes on that tape, and I said every time you run it through the machine, oxide will come off. Yes, of course an older tape will have had more passes, but frankly, in terms of electrically, if you're buying brand new SM468 as an example, new old stock 468, or you've got some 468 that you've got that you know has got some material recorded on it and you've wiped it, it's going to sound pretty much the same as each other. The slight difference is, of course, again, whether if there's be edge damage on the tape, like this poor wind, or if the tape has got splices or been stretched, there will be things that will affect it there. So I think we'll call a halt there on the Q&A. I'll be happy to answer any more questions if you wish to send them to me. There is, on this start, I said, on the information I sent you, there is a dedicated email address which I've asked people to use now, which is realresilience.webinars@gmail. It's just a Gmail account. Or you can use the inquiry, book, or repair form if you wish. Or if you want, realresilience@gmail.com is the other one. But I'm just trying to sort of separate them out into the different boxes. If you wish to answer some questions further, perhaps you thought, I want to ask something immediately this webinar finishes, I'll be happy to answer them. I will answer them. I'm not necessarily I'm a 24/7 answering service, but I will get back to you in two or 3 days with my thoughts, and I will answer them. Finally, I leave you with the details about Real Resilience. I'll leave that up on the screen for a little while. Thank you very, very much.